The security guard thought humiliating the old farmer would make him look powerful, but standing just 30 floors above that marble lobby was the one man who would soon make everyone regret it. The morning crowd flowed through the towering glass entrance of Carter National Bank like clockwork, polished dress shoes clicking across marble floors beneath shimmering gold chandeliers. Men in tailored suits checked luxury watches while women carrying leather handbags moved briskly between counters. Everything about the bank whispered money, status, and importance. And then Elijah Brooks stepped through the front doors. At 62 years old, Elijah looked nothing like the bank's wealthy clients. His faded denim jacket hung loosely over a plain brown work shirt, and his dusty boots carried traces of red Georgia clay across the spotless floor. A worn baseball cap shaded his tired eyes, and in his weathered hands rested an old cream-colored envelope folded carefully at the corners. The conversations around him slowed almost instantly. A young teller glanced toward security. An older couple exchanged uncomfortable looks. Near the entrance, Daniel Mercer straightened his Navy security jacket and narrowed his eyes the moment he spotted Elijah walking deeper into the lobby. Daniel had worked security at Carter National for almost 11 years, and he believed he could judge someone's worth within seconds of looking at them. To him, appearance meant everything. Expensive watch, respect, tailored suit, importance, dusty boots and worn denim, trouble. He stepped directly into Elijah's path before the old farmer reached the reception desk. "Sir," Daniel said sharply, forcing a tight smile, "this bank is for customers only." Elijah stopped calmly, his expression unreadable. "I am a customer," he replied softly. Daniel's eyes drifted down toward the man's clothes again before letting out a quiet scoff. "Right," he muttered. Behind them, several nearby clients slowed their pace, pretending not to stare while clearly listening. Elijah gently lifted the envelope in his hand. "I was invited here this morning." Daniel barely glanced at it. "Look, old man, I don't know who told you to walk in here, but this isn't some public waiting room." His voice grew louder now, enough for nearby customers to hear. "People come here to handle serious money." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the lobby. Elijah remained still, calm, dignified, and somehow that silence irritated Daniel even more. Because the old farmer didn't look embarrassed. He looked patient, like a man waiting for something the rest of the room didn't know was coming. Daniel crossed his arms tightly across his chest, clearly enjoying the attention gathering around them. The marble lobby had grown quieter now, not silent yet, but tense in the way expensive places become when people sense embarrassment unfolding in public. A woman near the investment desk lowered her sunglasses just enough to stare openly at Elijah. Two men in tailored charcoal suits whispered to each other while pretending to review documents. Even the receptionists behind the front counter kept glancing up from their computer screens. Elijah Brooks stood calmly in the middle of it all, his old boots planted firmly against the polished floor as if he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. Daniel took another step closer. "I am going to ask you one last time," he said, his voice firm and performative now. "Leave before you create a scene." Elijah slowly looked around the bank lobby, taking in the towering pillars, the glowing chandeliers, and the gold Carter National emblem mounted behind the reception desk. His eyes rested there for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly to himself, almost as if confirming something. "I drove nearly 80 miles this morning because I was told someone here wanted to meet me personally," he said quietly. Daniel let out a short laugh. "Someone important invited you here?" he asked loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "What?" "The chairman himself." A few people chuckled under their breath. Elijah did not react. That only irritated Daniel more. Most people in situations like this became defensive or embarrassed. Elijah simply stood there with a kind of quiet patience that made Daniel feel strangely unsettled. The old farmer carefully unfolded what remained of the cream-colored envelope in his hands. The edges were worn, but the embossed Carter National seal was still visible beneath the tear running across the center. Before Elijah could speak again, Daniel snatched the paper from his hands with a dismissive shake of his head. "You really think carrying around an envelope makes this believable?" he said. Then, without hesitation, he tore the invitation completely in half. The ripping sound echoed sharply across the marble lobby. A hush fell over the room. One of the younger tellers inhaled quietly in shock. Elijah looked down at the torn pieces scattered near his dusty boots. but his expression never changed. He bent slowly, picked up one half of the invitation, and brushed it clean with weathered fingers. Then he looked back at Daniel with calm, steady eyes. "Young man," he said softly, "there are some mistakes that cost more than money." For the first time that morning, Daniel's confident smile faded just slightly. For a brief moment, nobody in the lobby moved. The air itself seemed heavier after Elijah's quiet warning. Daniel Mercer glanced around and noticed the eyes on him now. Wealthy clients, bank employees, even the valet near the glass entrance were watching to see how he would respond. And Daniel hated looking weak in front of an audience. His jaw tightened as he forced out a dry laugh. "You are threatening me now?" he asked loudly. Elijah slowly folded the torn half of the invitation and slipped it carefully back into his jacket pocket. "No," he answered calmly. "I am trying to save you from embarrassment." That only made a few people snicker harder. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "You really believe someone important is coming down here for you?" he asked. "Do you know how many people try walking into this bank pretending they belong?" Elijah did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the private executive elevators at the far end of the lobby. Gold doors. Restricted access. The kind only senior executives used. Daniel noticed the glance and smirked. "You are looking in the wrong direction, old man," he said. "People upstairs do not know you exist." Near the reception desk, a young teller named Claire shifted nervously. She had watched the entire exchange unfold, and something about Elijah's calm demeanor unsettled her. Most people who were lying became angry under pressure. This man looked almost disappointed. Claire leaned toward her supervisor quietly. "Should we maybe call Mr. Reynolds from management?" she whispered. The supervisor immediately shook his head. "Do not interfere," he muttered under his breath. "Daniel knows what he is doing." But Daniel did not feel nearly as confident as he looked. Something about Elijah's composure kept bothering him. The old farmer was not begging to stay. He was not embarrassed. He was simply waiting. Then the sound came. Ding. The executive elevator chimed softly across the lobby. Several employees instinctively straightened their posture at once. Daniel turned toward the gold elevator doors as they slowly slid open. Two senior executives stepped out first, both wearing dark tailored suits and tense expressions. They scanned the lobby quickly, then looked directly toward Elijah Brooks. The atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A hush spread across the marble floor. One of the executives leaned toward the elevator and spoke respectfully to someone still inside. "Sir," he said quietly, "he is here." Daniel frowned in confusion as a polished black dress shoe appeared beyond the opening doors. Then Chairman William Carter stepped into the lobby himself. And the moment his eyes landed on Elijah Brooks, the color drained from Daniel Mercer's face. The entire lobby froze as Chairman William Carter stepped out of the executive elevator. At 68 years old, Carter carried the kind of presence that silenced rooms without effort. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair neatly combed, and every employee inside Carter National instinctively straightened the moment he appeared. But what shocked everyone was not the chairman coming downstairs unexpectedly. It was the expression on his face when he saw Elijah Brooks standing near the center of the lobby beside the torn invitation scattered across the marble floor. "Mr. Brooks," Carter said quietly, his voice carrying through the silence. Daniel Mercer immediately stepped backward, suddenly aware of every eye in the bank turning toward him. "Sir," Daniel stammered nervously, forcing a smile. "There seems to have been some misunderstanding here." Chairman Carter did not even look at him. His attention remained fixed on Elijah as he walked forward with measured steps. Then, to the complete disbelief of everyone watching, the chairman extended both hands warmly toward the old farmer. "I was worried you might not come," he said sincerely. Elijah shook his hand calmly. "Traffic outside Macon was slow," he replied softly. The tension in the room deepened instantly. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Claire, the young teller near the counter, covered her mouth slightly in shock. Daniel's face had gone pale. His eyes darted between Elijah's dusty boots and the chairman standing beside him, as if his mind could not process what he was seeing. Then Chairman Carter noticed the torn paper lying near Elijah's feet. His expression darkened. Slowly, he bent down and picked up one half of the cream-colored invitation. The embossed Carter National seal was visible beneath the rip running through the center. "What happened to this?" he asked quietly. No one answered. The silence became unbearable. Daniel swallowed hard before stepping forward awkwardly. "Sir, I was simply handling security protocol," he explained quickly. This man entered the bank without proper appearance for. Carter turned sharply toward him for the first time. Daniel stopped speaking immediately. The chairman's calm expression remained controlled, but disappointment had settled heavily into his eyes. "This man," Carter said slowly, "is Elijah Brooks." He paused, letting the name hang in the silent lobby. "The man who loaned my father $500 from his own farm savings 52 years ago when our family had absolutely nothing." A wave of stunned realization spread across the room. Carter looked back at Elijah with visible respect. Without him, he continued quietly, there would never have been a Carter National Bank. The marble lobby fell completely silent. And in that silence, Daniel Mercer finally understood the size of the mistake he had made. Daniel Mercer felt the weight of every eye in the lobby pressing down on him, as Chairman Carter stood beside Elijah Brooks with unmistakable respect. Just minutes earlier, he had treated the old farmer like an inconvenience standing in the wrong building. Now the most powerful man in Carter National Bank was looking at Elijah as if he were family. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Nobody spoke. Even the sound of keyboards behind the reception desk had stopped. Chairman Carter carefully folded the torn invitation in his hands before turning toward the gathered employees and customers. "Most of you know the story of this bank," he said calmly. "But very few know the truth about how it actually survived long enough to become what it is today." The chairman glanced at Elijah with quiet gratitude before continuing. 52 years ago, my father was one missed payment away from losing everything. No investor would help him. No bank would even let him through the front door." Carter paused. But one man did. Elijah lowered his eyes slightly, uncomfortable with the attention now surrounding him. Chairman Carter smiled faintly. "My father met Elijah Brooks on a rural road outside Savannah after his truck broke down during a storm. They talked for less than 20 minutes. Several customers leaned closer, completely absorbed now. At that time," Carter continued, "Mr. Brooks was barely making enough from his farm to support himself. Yet when my father admitted he was desperate, Elijah went home, opened a rusted coffee tin filled with years of savings, and handed him $500 cash." A soft murmur spread through the lobby. In 1974, $500 was a life-changing amount for a struggling farmer. Chairman Carter's voice softened further. "My father tried to write a repayment contract. Elijah refused. He simply said, 'If you build something good one day, help somebody else when it is their turn.'" The room fell silent again. Daniel stared at Elijah in disbelief. The old man standing in dusty work boots beside the marble columns had once helped create the very institution Daniel had used to judge him. Chairman Carter slowly looked around the lobby at the employees standing frozen nearby. "Everything you see in this building exists because one man chose kindness when he had every reason not to." His eyes finally settled on Daniel. And today, that same man was humiliated for the way he looked. Daniel's throat tightened instantly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Because for the first time in years, the security guard realized something terrifying. The poorest-looking man in the room had been the richest in character all along. Daniel Mercer stood motionless near the entrance desk, his face drained of color as the truth settled over the lobby like heavy fog. Just 15 minutes earlier, he had spoken to Elijah Brooks as if the old farmer were beneath everyone in the building. Now dozens of eyes shifted toward Daniel with something very different from admiration. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked ashamed for remaining silent. Chairman Carter slowly handed the torn invitation back to Elijah with careful respect. "I apologize for what happened here today," he said sincerely. Elijah accepted the paper gently and gave a small nod. "You do not owe me an apology, William," he replied quietly. "Not for another man's choices." The words landed harder than anger ever could have. Daniel lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he wished someone would stop looking at him. Chairman Carter turned toward the executive staff standing nearby. "Cancel my next meeting," he said calmly. "Mr. Brooks and I will be having lunch upstairs." Several executives immediately nodded. One assistant hurried toward the elevator to prepare the private dining room normally reserved for investors and political guests. The contrast was impossible to miss. The same man Daniel had nearly forced out of the building was now being escorted to the most exclusive floor in the bank. Claire watched Elijah carefully as he adjusted the sleeve of his faded denim jacket. There was no smugness in him, no satisfaction, no attempt to embarrass the man who had humiliated him publicly. That quiet dignity unsettled the room more than shouting ever could have. Chairman Carter paused before entering the elevator and looked once more toward Daniel. "Do you know the first thing my father taught every employee when this bank opened?" he asked quietly. Daniel swallowed hard but could not answer. Carter continued anyway. He said, "Money reveals character. It does not create it." The silence that followed felt endless. A middle-aged customer near the loan office slowly removed his expensive sunglasses and stared at Elijah with visible regret. Another woman who had laughed earlier now looked down at the marble floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Elijah finally turned toward Daniel himself. The old farmer studied the security guard for a moment, not with anger, but disappointment. "Young man," he said softly, "never let a uniform convince you that you are better than somebody else." Daniel's lips parted slightly, but once again, no words came out. Because deep down, he knew the old farmer was right. The executive elevator doors slowly opened behind them. Chairman Carter placed a respectful hand near Elijah's shoulder, guiding him toward the private floor above. And as the doors closed, the entire marble lobby remained completely silent, haunted by the realization that the man they judged most harshly had shown the greatest grace of all. The executive elevator carried Elijah Brooks and Chairman Carter upward in complete silence, while the marble lobby below remained frozen in the aftermath of what had just happened. Inside the mirrored elevator walls, Elijah quietly adjusted the brim of his old cap, while Carter stood beside him with the respectful posture of a man standing next to someone he deeply admired. Neither man seemed rushed. Neither needed to fill the silence. But downstairs, the atmosphere had completely changed. Daniel Mercer remained near the entrance desk as whispers slowly spread across the bank like wildfire. Employees who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact entirely. Customers who once looked at Elijah with suspicion suddenly replayed every moment in their minds with growing embarrassment. Claire finally broke the silence behind the reception counter. "He drove 80 miles just to be treated like that," she said quietly. Nobody answered her, because nobody could defend what they had witnessed. Near the glass entrance, an older customer shook his head slowly. "Funny thing about dignity," he muttered softly to his wife. "The people who have the most of it usually do not need everyone else to notice." Upstairs, the private executive dining room overlooked the entire Atlanta skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sunlight across polished oak tables and crystal glasses prepared for investors and politicians. Yet Elijah Brooks looked completely untouched by the luxury surrounding him. He stood near the window calmly, staring down at the busy streets below, as if he had seen far more important things in life than expensive buildings. Chairman Carter poured 2 glasses of sweet tea himself and placed one carefully in front of Elijah. "My father talked about you until the day he died," Carter said quietly. Elijah smiled faintly. "Your father was a good man," he replied. Carter lowered himself into the chair across from him. "He never forgot what you did for him," he admitted. "Neither did I." Elijah looked down at the glass in his weathered hands. "I did not help him because I thought he would become rich," he said softly. "I helped him because he looked like a man carrying too much weight alone." Carter nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. That is exactly what people downstairs failed to understand today. The room fell quiet again. Then Carter leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully, "there is another reason I invited you here." Elijah raised his eyes calmly. Carter hesitated for a moment before speaking. 3 months ago, we discovered documents connected to the original founding shares of this bank." Elijah frowned slightly, confused for the first time that day. Chairman Carter slid a leather folder slowly across the polished table toward him. "And according to those records," he said quietly, "part of Carter National Bank legally belongs to you." Elijah Brooks stared quietly at the leather folder resting on the polished oak table between him and Chairman Carter. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlanta skyline glowed beneath the afternoon sun, but inside the executive dining room, the air felt still and heavy with something far more important than business. Elijah slowly opened the folder with careful hands roughened by decades of farm work. Inside were yellowed legal papers, old signatures, and faded photographs attached beside official banking documents. His tired eyes narrowed slightly as he read the first page. Chairman Carter spoke softly across from him. "My father never considered your $500 a loan," he explained. "He considered it faith." Elijah remained silent, continuing to study the documents. Carter leaned back slowly in his chair. "A few years after the bank opened, my father had attorneys draft original founding shares under your name. He intended to give them to you personally." Elijah finally looked up. "But he never did," he said quietly. Carter nodded with regret. "Before he could deliver them, your farm was hit by that flood in 1982. You disappeared from Savannah shortly after." Elijah's eyes drifted back toward the papers. Memories long buried behind years of hard work slowly resurfaced in the silence. The flood, the ruined crops, the endless rebuilding. Life had moved on, and the small favor he once gave a struggling stranger became something he never thought about again. Chairman Carter folded his hands carefully. 3 months ago, our legal department uncovered the original shareholder records during an archive audit. He paused. Adjusted for 52 years of growth, those shares are now worth over $40 million. The words settled into the room quietly, almost unreal against the soft hum of the city beyond the glass windows. Yet Elijah's expression barely changed. No shock, no excitement, only thoughtful silence. Carter watched him carefully, almost expecting disbelief. Instead, the old farmer simply removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose slowly. $40 million, he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the number rather than admiring it. Carter gave a small smile. "You helped build this bank before it even existed, Mr. Brooks. That ownership was always yours." Elijah leaned back in his chair and looked down at the busy streets far below. "Funny thing," he said quietly after a long pause. "I spent my whole life thinking I was just helping a tired man on the side of the road." Chairman Carter lowered his eyes respectfully. "You were," he answered. "And that one act of kindness changed thousands of lives." The room fell silent once more. But downstairs, beyond the marble lobby and polished glass walls, Daniel Mercer still stood near the entrance, completely unaware that the quiet old farmer he humiliated that morning had just become one of the largest shareholders in the entire bank. Nearly an hour later, the executive elevator doors opened once again onto the marble lobby below. Conversations immediately faded as employees and customers turned toward the sound. Elijah Brooks stepped out beside Chairman Carter with the same quiet posture he had carried all morning. The only difference now was the way people looked at him. No one saw dusty boots anymore. No one saw an old denim jacket. They saw the man whose kindness had helped build the institution surrounding them. Daniel Mercer remained near the entrance desk exactly where he had been left, though the confidence that once filled his posture had completely disappeared. His shoulders were tense, his expression pale, and his eyes lowered the moment Elijah approached. Chairman Carter stopped near the center of the lobby and calmly addressed the executive staff gathered nearby. "Effective immediately," he said, "Mr. Brooks will be joining the Carter National Advisory Board as an honorary founding shareholder." A wave of stunned whispers spread through the room. Several executives nodded respectfully toward Elijah, while others looked visibly shaken by the announcement. $40 million. Advisory board membership. Founding ownership. The same old farmer they had watched being humiliated less than 2 hours earlier now held more influence in the bank than almost everyone standing there. Yet Elijah himself remained unchanged. Calm, humble, steady. Chairman Carter turned toward Daniel one final time. "You judged a man's value before learning his story," he said quietly. "That is a mistake this institution cannot afford." Daniel's lips trembled slightly. "Sir, I am sorry," he managed quietly, finally looking toward Elijah directly. "I should never have treated you that way." The lobby remained completely silent. Everyone waited to see how Elijah Brooks would respond. The old farmer studied Daniel for a long moment before speaking softly. "Son, every person who walks through these doors is carrying something you cannot see." Daniel lowered his head further. Elijah continued gently. "Some carry money. Some carry pain. Some carry hope. But none of them deserve humiliation." The words settled deeply into the room. Several employees looked away, visibly emotional now. Claire quietly wiped tears from her eyes behind the reception desk. Chairman Carter gave Elijah a small, respectful nod, understanding that the old farmer had just taught a lesson no executive seminar ever could. Elijah adjusted the brim of his faded cap once more before slowly turning toward the glass entrance. Sunlight spilled across the marble floor as the doors opened ahead of him. Before stepping outside, he paused briefly and looked back at the silent lobby behind him. "Character," he said softly, "is how you treat people who can do nothing for you." Then he walked out into the afternoon light exactly the same way he had entered earlier that morning. Quiet, simple, dignified.